Okay, this is going to be a long-term review of my 2019 Jamis Renegade exploit. I purchased this in November of 2019 and it's now January of 2021, so I've had it approximately 13 months. Done a couple bike tours on it, 2 multi-day and then 1 overnight. It's a size 58. I'm 6 foot tall and it fits me pretty good. It's currently in my bike packing configuration, or what I hope to be my bike packing configuration. I haven't had a chance to try out these new wheels. These are the Hunt Adventure Series with the Terravale Washburn 650 by 47 size tires, both front and back. And the Washburn has a center slick, kind of like a hybrid tire. Gives you the best of both worlds. You'll be able to ride it on the asphalt and then take it on some gravel roads and get some traction. As you can see, this wheel set has the dynamo hub from Hunt. As you see it here, this bike weighs with pedals. These are the combo pedals that have the flat pedal on one side and then SPD on the other by Shimano. There's 2 bottle cage holders on there and then a little piece of metal that shifts down the bottle cage so I can fit my half frame, my custom half frame bag in there. And then the only other thing on there is the holder for the bike pump right there. So in this configuration, this bike weighs 26.25 pounds. I won't go into all the different configurations you can mount your gear and carry your gear, because different people do it different ways. So with regard to the gearing, as we know, these adventure bikes tend to come with too high of gearing for anyone who wants to do any bike touring or serious bike packing with the hills that we have to deal with. And if you watched any of my other videos, you know that I went through this whole process of swapping out the gearing to get a lower gear inch. This 11-46 cassette by Sunrace lives on these 650B wheels. What I do when I go on a bike trip is I replace this 40 tooth that lives on there most of the time. As you can see here, goes on there, lines up. I pull this 40 off, then I simply put on the chain ring I want to run up front. According to the specs for this bike, the maximum you can put on is a 47mm by 650B tire. Now when I did the Idaho Hot Springs mountain bike tour, I rode it on the 700C by 40, which was way too small of a tire. If you watch that series, you can hear me constantly complain about how I got the wrong tire on the bike. Curious whether I could get a slightly larger tire on it. Now, in the back on the chainstay, I wasn't able to get a tighter tire on it. I was able to get this Victorio Mezcal on it. It's a 2.1 size, and it was able to clear the forks, maybe by like 1/8 of an inch on each side. It was really quite close, but I did ride it for a day or two, and it did clear, and my plan is to squeeze this 2.1 up front. It's got a really nice tread pattern for gravel or cross country. So I'll have a 47 in the back, and then I will have a 2.1 in the front. I want to get as much air volume in the tires as possible. So I went ahead and put the 700C tires back on, and this is probably 99% of the way I ride the bike with these 38 by 700C wheels and tires that I covered in the first video. And I've gone ahead and put on the 40 tooth up front, and the 11-42 in the back lives on these wheels. So I'm basically back to my factory configuration, other than it being an NX crank and an aftermarket 40, because like I said in one of my other videos, SRAM only goes up to 38 tooth in the NX crank set. So I haven't really had any problems with this off-brand at Fourier's, I think it's called. I think I got it on eBay. It took me about a half hour to make the conversion. The hardest thing was probably putting in these 3mm spacers to get the chain ring in the correct alignment. I took off the asphalt seat. I didn't really find it that comfortable, and this is just an inexpensive Amazon or eBay gel seat, which I had on my touring bike. It's a great seat, works fine for me. The other thing I didn't go into it as a Ritchie cockpit. I really like these handlebars. First time I've had bars like that, but they're really great when you're riding to have the bar flare out a little bit this way. It gives you a different position on your hands. This is the original bar tape that came with the bike. It's still, you can see it's wearing a little bit, but it's really quite foamy and spongy. I really like it. It's very beefy, very comfortable bar tape. Without the bell, but with the pedals like before, and without the air pump, but the holder and then the bottle cages and the little piece that lowers them, weighs 25 pounds. As I said, there's probably about 2,400 miles on this bike, and with regard to these Gravel King tires that I have, maybe about 2,200 of them have been on these tires here. And as you can see, they've worn down now. I don't know if I would necessarily go with this exact same tire again, because most of my riding is urban, not unlike roads like this once in a while. I don't really take advantage of the gravel aspect of these tires. The other thing of note is when I switch tires, I have to adjust the brake caliper. There's a little bit of a slight rubbing. The tolerances aren't exactly the same on the disc, so I basically just spin the tire, squeeze the brake handle a couple times to get it lined up, and then squeeze and hold, then retighten the caliper in that position, and that gets rid of the brake rub. Like I mentioned earlier, I've done 3 bike trips on this bike, 2 being multi-day and 1 being an overnight. The first one was a multi-day trip. I made a video about it, and that was from Fort Bragg, California to Sacramento. It was probably a 4.5-day trip with 4 nights. And if you watch that video, you'll notice that I had a shimmy problem. They say to test everything before you go out. I did test everything, but I also tested it all independently. I didn't necessarily test it all loaded together. So what happened was literally, as soon as I started my ride, I had a shimmy or a wobble. I stopped multiple times and moved the weight around. I took the weight off the front because the handlebar was shimmying. And I thought maybe it was the weight up front, but the shimmy was originating in the back of the bike and migrating to the front. It was starting there and it would just come up here like this and would start wobble. And if you watch the video, you'll see that I couldn't take my hands off the handlebar. But here, look, here's what it's doing. I don't know if you can tell in the video, but it just migrates down the whole bike. I think I figured out what it was, and Henry Wildeberry kind of went into this a little bit. I think 3 things came into play that caused this wobble. The first is that it's a 58C bike frame. That's considered an extra large by most bike manufacturers. That in turn got the center of gravity up higher. The other issue, I believe, is that this bike has 631 steel, which I believe is a thinner walled steel. So it's a higher grade steel. You can use a thinner wall on the tubing, and that gives you greater comfort and hence maybe even more flex. Last but not least, and more importantly, was the weight distribution, and I believe that had a lot to do with this rack that I have on here. Now, this isn't the way the rack was on there when I rode that tour. This rack is an Axiom rack. It's a universal rack. They give you some plates to attach here. You attach the plates here, and it comes down even further, and then you pick a hole, and that, depending on the wheel size, that's the alignment that you use. And what I found is when I first mounted it, I thought, man, this thing is really high, because with those plates, the rack was way up here, and it was also back further. And the reason they set it back far because it's universal, and with that adapter plate, it pushes it back further so that your heel doesn't strike on a shorter chainstay bike. I think the weight being so high, coupled with the frame thickness and the size of the bike, it caused the wobble. Since it's been modified, I did do an overnight trip, and it worked fine. I think lowering this rack solved the problem. So it's just something to be aware of. Maybe if you have a smaller frame and your rack is low, you'll never have this issue. But if you do get a really nasty shimmy in the bike, it might be because the center of gravity is too high. This has a lower gear inch than my road bike. Even though it's a heavier bike, I can climb hills a little bit better. So that's kind of my follow-up review. I really do like the bike. More often than not, I find myself reaching for this bike because it's so much more comfortable than my traditional road bike. I have an aluminum carbon fork bike. There's quite a difference in the ride quality. That bike only weighs 21 pounds. This one weighs 25. I'm not out to break any records, so the comfort factor is more important than the speed factor for me. No one bike does everything, but this does a lot. It's a great commuter. It's a halfway decent road bike. It's a nice gravel bike, and it's a nice bike packing or bike touring bike. You know, it's a very versatile bike.